Alright guys, so Jingliu, the Ice Queen DPS, is having her rerun in 2.1, and I'm sure some of you may be thinking, is she still worth picking up since it has been a while since she initially released? Before we go over exactly that, would really appreciate it if you can subscribe to the channel, and also if you enjoyed the video, drop a like. Okay, let me quickly breeze through her kit. Her basic attack is just a standard basic, but you really at all costs want to avoid using it, and I'll explain why shortly. Her skill has two variations, the first one being a single target ice attack which provides a stack of syzygy. The second variation is when Jingliu is in her spectral state and the single target becomes a blast attack, meaning the adjacent enemies will also receive damage. Now the talent, which would be the core of Jingliu's kit. When Jingliu has two stacks of syzygy, she enters her spectral state, which does numerous things. Firstly, she is advanced forward by 100%, meaning she will take action as soon as she enters her spectral state. Her crit rate also increases up to 50% depending on how high you level her trace. As I mentioned before, her skill will switch into the second variation too, which becomes a blast attack, and the sweet thing behind this variation, not only does she attack more enemies, but it won't consume skill points at all, making Jingliu very skill point positive. However, it does come at a small cost, being that she will consume 4% of her allies' max HP every time she attacks in her spectral state. But the upside from this is every attack from Jingliu in the spectral state increases her attack by 540% of the total HP consumed from her allies. So the talent essentially provides a huge crit rate boost, a huge attack boost, and switches a skill into a blast attack which won't consume skill points. Now there are a few ways you would be able to obtain stacks of syzygy. One would be through her technique, which is insanely valuable since you would be able to start the battle with one stack of syzygy already. You only need 2 to enter her spectral state, so if you have Jingliu with enough speed to go first, you can enter the spectral state straight away when you enter battle. The technique does also provide 15 energy, so you can ult sooner and freeze enemies which take ice damage equal to 80% of Jingliu's attack at the start of every turn. The second way to obtain a stack of syzygy is through the ultimate. The ult is also a blast attack and will provide a stack of syzygy. However, try to treat the stack of syzygy you gain from the ult as a way to stay in the spectral state. Each time you use a skill in the spectral state, you consume a stack of syzygy. Once you have no stacks left, you revert back into her base state. However, if you ult in the spectral state, it will provide a stack which allows you to use the skill 3 times rather than twice. The big brain play is to keep Jingliu in her spectral state as long as possible through ulting to keep dealing that crazy damage she does. Lastly, the skill will be the final way to provide a stack of syzygy, so you would rather use her skill over the basic, which doesn't help getting Jingliu into her spectral state. 2 of her traces are orientated more towards her being in the spectral state. First one being she will have increased effect res by 35%, and the second one is her ult damage is increased by 20% in the spectral state. So ultimately, you will always want to keep Jingliu in her spectral state, as it's when you would really rely on her damage dealing capabilities. You wouldn't really want to rely on her base state as she does hardly any damage. However, that would be fine since you can enter a spectral state very easily. Moving on to the sort of allies you would likely want to run with Jingliu. Now the undisputable best in slot support for Jingliu would be Bronya. Now the fact that Bronya is a standard banner 5-star makes it so much easier to run Jingliu near maximum efficiency, and I'm sure by now a lot of you would have Bronya. If not, there's always a chance to pull her from losing 50-50. Enabling Jingliu to have another turn with Bronya's skill essentially allows Jingliu to enter a spectral state insanely quick. Jingliu is a very greedy DPS, meaning in most comps you would have her being the hyper carry for the team. So it would consist of Jingliu being the main DPS and the rest of her team are supports and sustainers. So this kind of makes it really easy to build teams around Jingliu as there's a ton of variations. Supports could range from Bronya, RuanMei, Sparkle, Pella and Tingyun. Sustainers would range from Luocha, Fushuan and Huohuo. Of course, you can run Blade as a sub DPS too with Jingliu since she does trigger Blade's talent quite often through consuming HP from her allies in the spectral state. So Jingliu is just extremely flexible with her allies, and if you have some of these characters already built up, you may want to consider actually picking her up. When it comes to Jingliu's Lycon options, she has quite a few options available to her. Of course, the signature will be her best in slot as it does increase her crit damage, increases the damage dealt to enemies, and ignores defense of enemies. However, you have On the Fall of an Ion, which is free through her to store, which can increase your attack up to 64% and your damage up to 24%. Also, Under the Blue Sky, which is a force option, can increase your attack up to 32%, and when you defeat an enemy, your crit rate increases up to 24% for 3 turns. So with options like these, you don't really need to pull for Jingliu's signature Lycon. Jingliu, in my opinion, is an incredible DPS due to how much damage she can deal and just being an insanely easy character to build. The huge crit rate boost she gains from her talent means building relics will be less of a hassle as you just want to build as much crit damage on her as possible with some crit rate in there. Usually you would find yourself having to balance between building both crit rate and crit damage, but with Jingliu it becomes so much easier to manage. Also, when it comes to team building, her best in slot support is Bronya, meaning it doesn't require you to dump a load of jades for an additional character to make Jingliu great. Similar to how Imbibe to Lune does need Sparkle in order to run at maximum efficiency, Jingliu has Bronya. Now the only issue I personally have with Jingliu is that I don't see how she can get any better in her role as a DPS. Unlike Imbibe to Lune, where he had a slight issue with skill points and constantly needing more, Sparkle was introduced and resolved that for him, allowing Imbibe to Lune to run at maximum potential. Jingliu has been flawless since her release, so she basically can't get any better from what we can see. So then you have characters like Acheron that release that can deal a ton more damage, and there's nothing Jingliu can currently do to reach those lengths of damage Acheron can deal. So for meta slaves and veterans that have been playing for a while, I'm sure you already have your answer. I wouldn't really recommend pulling Jingliu since unless you're Acheron, hypercarry teams seem to be fading out from the meta. Teams such as Kafka and BlackSwan Dot, as well as the follow-up attack comp, seem to just be a lot stronger overall. I'm not saying Jingliu is a bad DPS at all. I mean, I still run her as my second primary DPS, but it's clear to see the difference in those teams with multiple DPS characters with amazing synergy and a Jingliu hypercarry team. If you still would want to pull her, she still is considered as an amazing DPS and will be able to deal great damage. If you really don't care about meta and clearing quicker than everyone, she would still be a good pickup even in 2.1, and to be honest, you can clear pretty much all content in the game with Jingliu. As long as you're able to do that, I don't see any issues with her. It would only stop becoming an issue if new game modes release later down the line that would require Acheron levels of damage, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. However, for newer players to the game that still would need a second DPS character along with Acheron, I'm hoping you picked up, Jingliu would be one of the best characters you could possibly pick up. Jingliu offers a crazy amount of free stats, and to build a solid team for her wouldn't be as investment heavy as others. So you could see yourself dealing really good damage with Jingliu not long after pulling her. Whilst in early game, the last thing you would want to experience is building multiple characters you need to also summon for just for one team. So hypercarry teams are much easier to use and can really be effective in early stages of the game. So yeah, overall, Jingliu in 2.1 is still an amazing DPS character that requires such little investment in comparison to majority of other DPS characters. She can clear everything in the game, so would be a good pickup for anyone unless you're a meta slave. For newer players, I would highly recommend picking her up since it will be very easy and quick to get those high numbers out of her. And that's pretty much it. If you guys enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, would really appreciate it, and drop a like. Also drop a comment on whether you are pulling for Jingliu, or if you already have her, how do you think Jingliu holds up in 2.1? And yeah, hope to catch you guys later.